Internet privacy. Is it an oxymoron or is it attainable? And should the government protect it? Today on Roundtable Perspective, Internet scholar Dr. Dmitry Epstein joins me to discuss Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, and Internet governance. Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Tom Roach. I'm joined today by my guest, Dr. Dmitry Epstein, to discuss Internet governance. Dr. Epstein has a Ph.D. from Cornell University in communication. He currently serves as an assistant professor of digital policy at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Welcome to Roundtable.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and thank you for having me.
Very good. Let's just start with the broad question here. Who runs the internet? To what extent, is government involved, and to what extent are they hands-off?
So this is indeed a $1 million question.
Yeah.
Because the internet is, in many ways, unique compared to many other forms of communication that we've encountered before. And part of this uniqueness is how it evolved. Because it evolved, although it was a government, at least in the US, it was a government-funded project. It evolved very much outside of the purview of the government. It was the most probably non-governmental government project, which was run by academics, and it had a very academic flavor to it. And as it was picking up in popularity, and there was a need for, kind of letting it go from this research institute within the Department of Defense.
If I could just interject for a second. It went live when? What year did this? This is like late 80s.
So we need to separate between two things.
Yes.
The internet and the web.
Okay.
So the internet is basically a constellation of independent networks that can communicate with each other thanks to a series of protocols that were developed within DARPA back in the day. Now, on top of the internet, we have, and this kind of goes back, to the 70s and the 60s. On top of the internet, we have the web, right? And this is what we encounter most of the time, right? This is the kind of the graphic user interface, the hyperlinks, right? The search that we use, etc. And that was invented much later by Tim Berners-Lee at CERN. So that kind of runs as a layer on top of the internet.
So we're really talking mostly about the web.
Well, web, you can't kind of have web without having the internet, right? But the interesting thing is that by the time that traditional regulators realized that this is an important medium, right, and they may want to have a say in how it's regulated and what's going on there, there were already established institutions of decision-making about how internet should be run. Right, originally technical, but slowly they kind of became more and more political and social.
And time-wise, now we're in the 90s, or
so what happens? Like I think one of the constituting events in internet governance history was something called the World Summit on Information Society, which was a summit convened by the United Nations in two phases, in 2002 and 2005. Which was primarily focused on this very question. So who gets to make decisions about how the internet is run? Because again, it's very multifaceted creature. So for example, you have Internet Engineering Task Force. So this is the group that came up with some of these standards and protocols that allow us to have this ubiquitous internet that we have today. So they started again as a group of academics communicating with each other and trying to solve, to create this new, communication network. And they were working through this documents called requests for comments, RFCs. So what you see there, and this is actually the best documentation of the kind of technical history of the internet that we have. And they're all available online. And if you look at them, Sandra Brahman at Texas A&M now, she's done some phenomenal work on actually carefully reading those documents, and you can see how, like, back in the 70s, they were talking about questions of privacy, they were talking about spam, they were talking about human-machine communication.
Really? That's
right?
very
like,
interesting.
So, yes,
Yeah.
you kind of hear, it seems like so long ago, but they were thinking about these things as they were discussing this, communication protocols. And IETF, up until today, it's not a formal kind of body in the sense that they have a legal entity. Like anyone, like you can go, they hold I think 3 meetings a year in different parts of the world. You can buy a ticket, you can go into there and start arguing for a new email security, protocol. And there is this famous kind of phrase, like the motto of IETF: we do not recognize kings, we do not recognize voting, we believe in consensus and running code. Right, so this kind of very utopian vision of making internet work based on meritocracy.
So the internet emerges as sort of its own governing body. It's built by originally by a handful of people in the web, and they are, without necessarily going through any approval process, modifying this and developing it, and then the government gets involved.
Yes, and it's mostly
heavily.
So in many ways, privatization of the internet was already a form of government involvement, right? The U.S. government, purposely decided to privatize this network, right? It's part of, it's a policy decision.
Yeah.
Now, what happens? Why we have WSIS, is because foreign governments are getting concerned, right? So along the technical decisions, right, we also have more kind of political or classical policy decisions. One of them, right, is this whole space of domain names. So the way computers communicate with each other, right, is that each device connected to the internet has a unique address, right? And this is a collection of digits, and letters more recently. So computers know how to, navigate that. We as humans don't.
Yeah.
So there is this system, the domain name system, right, that allows us humans to type in, words in the search, in the address bar of our browser.
And why would that be an issue?
And that would be an issue because there is, so originally there was one person, this fascinating figure, John Postel, who, like, if you look up his pictures online, has this very classical, 60s counterculture, look, and there's all these urban legends of him coming to White House wearing sandals. But
sort of the Willie Nelson of the computer crowd.
Exactly,
Okay.
And he would basically single-handedly manage this domain name system. So imagine a situation: you, marketing manager for, or VP of marketing for McDonald's. You need to look up this, then graduate students at University of California. Call him up and ask to be on the internet. So
Well, that's obviously changed.
yes, and there is an organization now called Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers that basically has two main hats. One is managing the domain name space, so they create policies and they kind of they can the most central point that regulates the domain name space.
So this is sort of a maintenance sort of regulation that you're talking about.
Yes,
here, right?
it is. But without this, you cannot really, have a stable internet.
Right.
Because they also they manage the distribution of IP addresses as well through the IANA function. But this space itself is highly political as well. For example, who should own .apple?
Well, and there's a lot of profiteering that goes on there. Because if you come up with a name, let's say, and you want to see if that name's available. I looked one up the other day, and it was available for $100,000. So I'm guessing, tell me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing somebody just went through and registered for all of the names they anticipated other people might be looking for, and then they're sitting back holding them.
There is a big industry around this, and this industry actually exploded a few years ago when they opened up the domain name space to generic names and to names in non-Roman scripts.
Yeah.
but the way the model works is that you don't own the domain, you lease it,
Yes.
right? So you need to renew
To
it. But yes,
sublease it from, yeah.
yes,
But the person who wants $1,000 for it or $100,000 for it isn't really using it for anything. They're
that's
just
right.
holding it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, and I mean that's like one of, just like you
Yeah.
would hold on to a piece of real estate in the physical world, I guess.
Right.
They believe they can leverage it into
Yeah.
a profit.
Yeah. But so then at another level, though, we're concerned about what information is being accessed and who's accessing it and what they're doing with it. So to what extent does the government have the authority to get involved in that, and to what extent are they hands off?
So that's kind of another, episode in developing in the
Yeah.
history of the internet, that with the .com, bubble and the explosion of online content, suddenly the government had, here in the US and around the world,
Yeah.
right, governments had to also ask questions about how to regulate what's going on online in terms of content. And back in the day, right, piracy was, a big thing. Protection of minors, right? Basically, in the US,
Right.
there are two main acts that regulate online content, right? The
Yeah.
Decency Act, which the main issue there is protection of minors online, and the second one is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is basically deals
Yeah.
with copyright online. And in many ways, this industry is left unregulated, right? Because the questions about copyright, right, were pushed
Sure.
forward by kind of more veteran industries interested in copyright, right?
Right.
So we do refer to the copyright legislation here as the Disney law in the United States,
Sure.
because Disney have a big stake in preserving that.
Right.
But it develops so rapidly, right, that the government's kind of always in a catch-up game with the big technology companies, right? When Google, for example, harmonized the privacy policy and the terms of service across all of their products, that had a huge impact on all millions, billions of Google product users around the world. And these are decisions that are made by private companies who are accountable, to the stakeholders, but not necessarily to the
Right.
public, to the extent as elected officials are. And recent news around Facebook and Cambridge Analytica suddenly,
Well, that's
raised this
the phase
question.
we're in right now, because
Yes.
Cambridge Analytica has done some amazing things with data that they harvested mostly through Facebook, I understand, right?
Yes.
And so, where do you think this is going? Are we going to prohibit certain uses of information, and is that
So the way
is that manageable?
It's a very good question. So this question is not new, right?
Yeah.
In 2016, there was a new European legislation,
Sure.
data protection legislation, that actually goes into effect in May this year, next month, which kind of puts, kind of tries to shift the balance in this equation of privacy, right, of individuals vis-a-vis internet companies or anybody who collects information online. Because right now it's very skewed in favor of service providers, because you can either take the service or leave, right? Like that's, for example, if you think about Facebook, like fundamentally, you can either, like your best kind of privacy protection, if you're really, concerned about your privacy, you won't be using Facebook.
Well,
right?
see, that's what makes this especially interesting to me. So, it's sort of like, people put this information on the internet,
Mm-hmm.
and then are concerned that somebody's using it for some reason that they, the example of this, I think, that comes to mind is in Paris, some artist dressed the Eiffel Tower up in lights, and every night after dark, on the hour, these lights go off and you get this light show. Well, somebody was telling me, I teach photography in Paris in the summer, somebody was telling me we're not allowed to take pictures of that because we're violating the artist's copyright. Well, how can you put something on the Eiffel Tower, one of the most viewed, structures in the world, and then tell people that's, I've got copyright on that, you can't take pictures of it?
I'm not an expert on French
No,
copyright
I understand.
law, but this
but
does
so
strike
if
me
I
as...
put my information out on Facebook, and it's public information, right? Do I really have a right to say, oh, you can't look at it? You can't use it? You can't put it into your computer and analyze it?
Well, first of all, you already did tell Facebook that they can do pretty much whatever they want with your information.
Yeah, because of the
right?
contracts,
Because you
right?
clicked
Yeah.
through, and probably the privacy terms that you clicked through when you
Yeah.
signed up are different from the ones that
Well,
are
so
in
is this really an
force
issue
today.
then, or not?
So privacy is, the Cheshire cat of values. It's not my quote, right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of a very charming smile, but nobody really knows what it looks like,
Sure.
right? It's very intangible to most people, and we usually kind of feel privacy when it's being violated, right? When
Right.
when Equifax leaks happened, right? And then
Sure.
Equifax leaks happened, and suddenly we're concerned because so much is dependent on our credit score, at least in this system, right?
Sure.
And it's much harder with Facebook. And actually, what we see in research, right, that there are two ways to think about privacy, right? There is this vertical privacy and horizontal privacy. And what we see...
So vertical privacy being
privacy,
within your organization.
So it's privacy vis-a-vis institutions. So for
Yes.
example, it's my privacy vis-a-vis Facebook, right? And
Okay.
horizontal privacy is social privacy, privacy vis-a-vis your peers. So it's
Right.
basically my concern about my privacy from, few hundred friends that I
Right.
have or connections that I have
Friends,
on
friends,
Facebook.
and
Yes.
as it chains out, right?
Exactly. So, so when we ask people to tell us what they think privacy means on social media, it seems like we have fresh data that we're still kind of combing through. But
Yeah.
it seems like that people rarely think about privacy in vertical terms, right? They are concerned, if I'm a college student, I'm concerned that my parents don't see what I did on Friday night,
Yeah.
right? Or like I'm, concerned that pictures of my kids will be seen by people that I don't want to see pictures of my kids. But people rarely concern themselves with what does the kind of service provider or any other institution do with their data. And yes, this is partially why people put stuff, out there. And then one of the arguments is to come and say, well, you put it out there, like how can you complain that somebody used or abused it? But as I kind of told you, when we talked before the show, there are layers of information. It's more than just what you posted there, right? The issue arises when Facebook as a company starts adding layers of information about your whereabouts online, about your whereabouts in the physical world, about your connections, about your purchase histories.
But of course, I'm carrying a phone that allows them to do that, and I'm aware of that. The other side of the issue for me is this: that let's say it were possible, which I'm not sure that it is, to protect people's privacy, to have a kind of a web internet privacy, and to protect that, if that's even a conceivable thing. Aren't we sort of, infringing a little bit on this idea of free speech and an open information environment? If we're telling companies you can't do this, you can do this with the information, but you can't do that with it, if it's public information to begin with?
Well, I think there are at least two prongs, right, to answering this question.
Yeah.
One is indeed kind of more question of literacy, right, and education. Kind of raising awareness of privacy, of the vertical aspects of privacy, but also kind of making this privacy concern again more explicit, potential privacy risks more explicit for people. So that's kind of the education route and capacity building route is kind of one way of tackling it, because I think, right, at least momentarily now after Cambridge Analytica, right, more people would pause and think before they post something on Facebook, or kind of,
which
think
they should
about
have been doing
how
to begin with, I think, though. I mean, it just it still amazes me that that people are surprised that that happened. I guess. I mean, well, let's just for a
surprises
second.
you because you're in the field. It's just like because you kind of deal with these questions all the time.
Well, specifically, what did Cambridge Analytica do that's most bothersome here? I mean, if we just have a couple of minutes left, but I mean, if you had to put it in a nutshell, what was their violation?
So I'll get to this in a second if I can answer like my
All right,
second
go ahead.
front
I'm
to
sorry.
this,
All right,
to
go
the
ahead.
previous question.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is that we can potentially shift the balance a little bit and give more control to people.
Yeah.
Like this is what the new European legislation, for example, does, right? It allows you to request the information that a third party has about you. And not just information that you provided, right? But what kind of analytical insights they gained from analyzing the information.
It seems like I'm
or
putting
how
up
they
a
did it.
billboard, and I'm saying some people can look at this and some people can't. But yet I put it on a billboard.
Well, but it's depending on what you signed up for. Like, right? Did you sign up to Facebook, right, to update your family because you study abroad,
Yeah.
or did you sign it up to use it, as a city square? But in Cambridge Analytica, I think like the main kind of issue there is the way they obtained the data. Right. So on the one hand, the researcher who collected the data, kind of, some would claim abused, the terms that Facebook had in place back in the day. Right. But
Yes.
any developer could do it back in the day, right?
Yeah.
You cannot do it anymore. But the other thing is that the data was allegedly collected for research purposes, but then it was resold for, commercial purposes.
Right.
And that's,
Political campaigns do this all the time. They call up and they say, "Oh, we're from this university and we're doing a poll for the election," but really it's one of the parties and they want to know if you're voting for their candidate, and then if you are, you get put on a list and they're going to call you and offer you a ride to the polling place on election day.
And you might be right,
Yeah.
and there is nothing new kind of under the sun, but it's what happens is that it's getting amplified in many ways.
Well, so it seems to me that maybe the issue here with Cambridge Analytica is the extent to which they did this and to the pervasive nature of it, right?
I think yes, and it's again and they did it around a very contested issue.
Well, of course.
So that's why it drew attention.
Yeah.
But I think again, kind of going back to being citizens in this new information world, right? To me, kind of understanding how these technologies that we use on a daily basis are regulated, how they designed, right, is part of the new civics.
Well, I guess what I'm questioning is, to what extent we should regulate it. Here's another way to look at this. What if this is not so much the Cambridge Analytica, the Russian involvement in the election and things like that? What if this isn't so much pointing out a flaw in how we're using the web as it is pointing out a flaw in democracy in the first place? I mean, one of the premises of democracy is that people can govern themselves. If they're aware of information and they use reason, they can elect the best leaders and they will make the best decisions. We're kind of saying here that people aren't to be trusted to judge things, and so we want to, to make sure that they judge things fairly, we want to make sure that we're controlling the information they get.
Well, but this is a very narrow view of what regulation is, right? Because, for example, instead of basically telling, Facebook or Google, this is how you should present information, right? You can tell Facebook and Google, make the basic principles of, that go into how you present information transparent, right?
Sure.
Make it very easy for your users to understand why they might be seeing particular types of news or particular search results or particular products suggested to them and not others. So here is a regulation that doesn't necessarily interfere with the business models or with democracy, right? But kind of gives the individual more tools to navigate this environment and make, as you said, right, kind of calculated, educated decisions about what to do with this information. So just to use the word regulation like as this all-encompassing idea, I think it's kind of glances over, the nuances, and that regulation is not necessarily government coming and telling you, kind of what to do. In many cases, it's also about just, setting principles or parameters and leave a lot for, interpretation.
But the intent would be to make it so that these third-party organizations couldn't come in and harvest information and take advantage of my naivete by swaying my political opinion, by giving me more information on one side of an issue than another. I mean, it seems like a debate we already had with newspapers. I mean, you don't want to outlaw the National Enquirer because it's less objective than the New York Times. But if the National Enquirer, were putting itself on everybody's doorstep every morning, would we be more concerned about it? I don't know.
Well, we don't regulate technology companies the way we regulate media companies,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if we view Facebook as a media company, which Mark Zuckerberg repeatedly stated a week ago that they are not, then we should treat them as a media company with everything attached to this. But since we don't, right? I think we're at a point in time, and like Cambridge Analytica is just one case that kind of nudges us in that direction. Is we need to kind of rethink what those social media companies are, what their role in society is, what it means for democracy.
Very good. That is all the time we have on our program. Thank you to Dr. Epstein for joining me today on the Roundtable Perspective. I'm Tom Roach. See you next time.